Hey folks, Andrew the Fulgor Milano guy here. In this video today, we're going to be installing two new Fulgor Milano columns, an 18-inch freezer column and a 30-inch refrigerator column. And I'm going to show you how to join them together, basically turning them into a single homogeneous unit. We'll be installing them in this opening behind me, and we'll be applying custom overlay panels to the front of them as well. And I'll show you how to get those all lined up. First thing I want to do is show you all the accessories and parts that come with the units that are necessary for the install. Each unit will come with its own set of cover trims that go on the outside of the appliance. In this case, we're putting the two appliances together to make a single appliance. So we're only going to use one set of these. There's two pieces in each one of these. Also coming with the companion 18-inch freezer is a central cover trim that we'll use to finish the install. Inside the freezer column, we also have an accessory bag, use and care manual and installation manual. Because this unit comes with an ice maker, it is intended to be connected to water. So part of the accessory pack is a water filter, the water connection elbow, an ice scoop, and the manifold for plugging the water filter into. In this video, we will not be installing the external water filter, as this unit will be fed from a central water filtration system that's located in the basement of the home. We have our mounting brackets specific to 18-inch appliances, anti-tip brackets, the side-by-side kit. If you recall, the freezer came with the central cover for when you're putting two units together. It also comes with the hardware kit for joining the two units together. And finally, the brackets and bolts for mounting the overlay panel on the appliance. Every installation you do is going to offer its own unique challenges, and this one is no different. One of the first things that I like to do before doing my install is make sure that everything has been constructed to the specifications. And that means the opening that we're going to be installing into, and then of course also the custom overlay panels. You don't want to discover that the panels are the wrong size near the end when you're about to install them on the appliance. So check everything ahead of time. In this case, some of you may have already noticed that this unit is actually taller than the opening we're trying to install it into. These are European products, and as such, they're designed for the European market. To bring them over to North America, they have to adapt them to the North American standard sizes. In this case, the standard size, the opening for these two units to be installed into, remember we've got an 18-inch and a 30-inch, add those two together, 48 inches. So the opening should be 48 inches wide, and it should be the standard 84 inches tall. In order to adapt the European product to the North American market, they added this ventilation cap to get to the 84-inch height. In today's installation, we're going to be removing these caps in order to be able to fit them into the opening, which the cabinet maker has made to the European specs. These brackets are used to join the units together and to install them into the openings. In order to adapt this European width product to a North American standard width, they use unique brackets to effectively make them wider. In this case, you may recall, our opening is not 48 inches. It's actually the European spec width of 47 5/16. So we can't use the included brackets that came with the unit. Instead, we'll have to use this accessory pack that I ordered, which has the European width brackets. That's what we'll be installing on these units today in order to effectively make them narrower to fit into the European opening width. Because all the appliances are designed for the European standard widths, in order to make them fit the North American standard widths, they come with their own unique brackets. And you can notice this one is for the 18-inch freezer, this one is for the 30-inch refrigerator, and they are different widths in order to make the European width effectively a North American width. In this case, we can't use these that are included with the appliance. What we will use is the European bracket, which as you can see has a different width altogether. If we were installing this in the correct sized opening, we would be using the included North American specified bracket. In this case, this is the 18-inch freezer, so we use the 18-inch bracket. The way we install that is we remove the two screws and then reinstall, pushing the bracket up nice and tight against the front. Installing both screws. However, in this case, we're not using the North American brackets. We're going to be using the European brackets. So I'll remove this. Replace that screw. The European brackets only use one screw. In order to fit this unit into the opening that was made to the European spec, we'll have to remove this ventilation cap that is put on in order to effectively make the units taller to match the North American standard height. So we'll do that by removing 4 Phillips screws. We're at the point now where we're going to join the 2 units together. In order to do that, what we have to do is level them up with respect to each other so that we can use the joining kit to connect them. So in order to do that, we've got 4 leveling points on each unit. We've got 4 rollers or 4 wheels that contact the floor, which makes it easy to move the units around. But when we're actually leveling them, we're going to use leveling legs at the front, and we use the leveling rollers at the back. And one of the things I've noticed, and unfortunately what often happens when units are being unpacked or moved around, is this leg is bent and damaged. So I'm going to show you how to straighten that out. And I also, in doing my initial adjustments, as you can see, we use a 13 mil or a 1/2 inch socket to raise the unit up at the back. When I went to adjust the one on this side, I found that the entire rod was disengaged. And I'll show you how to re-engage that with the rear leveling legs in detail. I discovered that this leg, unfortunately, when these units are shipped from the factory on the pallets, the legs are lowered down in order to give more stability to the product. And sometimes the delivery people don't park the legs back up out of the way when they're trying to get the unit off the skid, and it gets caught on the skid or gets bent or something like that. But what you can do is, what happens is, it's not the leveling leg that gets bent, but actually the frame or the nut that it screws into gets bent up here. So you can actually unscrew this to almost, you can see it's about 2.5 inches long. So if we just thread it back in about 1/4 of an inch, this gives us leverage to be able to bend the leg back straight. And you can do that with your hands. I wouldn't want to use a tool by the chance of damaging the threads, but it's really not that hard to bend it back nice and straight. And then we'll park it back up out of the way again. When I was trying to lower the rear leveling rollers down to the floor, I realized that the adjustment rod was spinning, but the leg wasn't coming down. What has happened is, again, whoever delivered the unit probably disengaged this rod. Try and show it to you here. But what we're going to do is rethread that rod into this leveling nut, this nut here, which kind of can spin on an axis. This is the mechanism for lowering that leveling leg. So we'll thread that in. Now, typically there's supposed to be a locking nut on the back as well. We won't need that. The important thing is that we're now engaged. So I will continue to thread that forward, and you'll see it now be able to engage the mechanism and raise the unit up. Of course, floor protection, always very important. So here you can see we're pretty close down at the bottom here, but obviously we'll have to bring this unit forward in order, what we're going to do is align these holes with each other and then screw them together. First step is to level the units with respect to each other. And you see I need to come up at the back right of this unit. So rather than putting the front leveling legs down in contact with the floor now in order to level them together, I don't want to do that now because the unit's not into the opening. I'll use that at the very end when I'm leveling it as one complete unit. So I'm going to use these lifting bags to help me level the units with respect to each other. These covers here along the bottom are used to cut off airflow to ensure that all of the air is going across the condenser and going in the direction that we want it to. I'm going to take these off now temporarily while we install the units, and at the very end I'll put them back on in place and they should be pushed down to the floor level. So I'm just going to back the screws off a little bit. Don't have to remove them fully. Just lift them up, they're keyholes. And lift and remove. So I've just got to raise up this unit on the left a little bit to align these. So I'll use my leveling bag. There we go, that's nice and even. This is the side-by-side joining kit that's included with the companion freezer. Now, this is a universal kit. You can see it's slotted. When you're installing the units into North American openings, you recall that we have very unique brackets that are individual to the size of the appliance. So 18-inch, 24-inch, 30-inch, or 36-inch, and they will all have their own unique thickness. Because of that, when you're putting two units together, you're always going to have a unique space or gap between those two units. And that's why this is slotted. So when you're joining the units together using these plates, you can accommodate for different distances between the two units. So these are the screws that come with the kit. These are the screws that are used to actually join the brackets together. I'll just demonstrate that now. So on the North American brackets, we use 2 screws. On the European brackets, they only come with 1 hole. So we'll only use 1 screw to join 2 brackets together. In this case, we'll use 2. Makes it nice and secure. And this is essentially what's going on between the 2 units. So here is going to be our gap between the bodies of the 2 appliances when they're joined together. And we'll want to make sure that gap is consistent from the front to the top to the back of the unit using these metal brackets to join them together. Because we're using the European brackets to join the units together, we only have 1 screw hole to connect them together. These are not meant to actually hold the 2 units together. It's kind of to help us initially connect them. Ultimately, the job of holding the units together are going to be done by the metal connecting plates. I suggest using a hand driver so that we don't strip the plastic out. Just kind of pinch them together with your fingers. These 3 brackets will tie the 2 units together. We'll use this bracket with 2 self-tappers and washers on the top. This bracket with 2 piercing screws at the front, at the bottom, and this one at the back at the bottom, and we'll use a pre-existing screw that's already on the back of the unit. Using a 10mm piercing screw, now that we've installed the bracket joining the 2 at the front, and our space between the units is dictated by our brackets, mounting brackets, we want to ensure that we have a consistent gap between the units. We're gonna put one bracket like this at the back. So we want that gap to match. Looks like we're at 11/16 between the two bottom unit compartments. And then between the body, it's about 1/2 inch. So we got about 11/16 between the unit compartments at the front. We just want to make sure we have that same distance between the two units at the back, and that's where we're at right now. I'm going to remove this screw. And we're going to reuse it and place the bracket underneath of this unit here. Pass the screw through the main hole. We'll leave it somewhat loose. And then we've got to switch to our 10 mil. And we're going to put our piercing screw into this hole. And then finally tighten the screw up. Now we're joined at the bottom. The last bracket we'll install will be on the top. We'll use piercing screws to go through these marked holes. These are not already punched holes, so we will have to pierce through. So we're going to line that there. Use a washer and the screw. Put it through the hole first. And then lastly, through the slot. And now we're all connected together. The unit should behave as a single appliance now. So at the back of our opening here, we have an individual outlet for each unit, which is perfect, and they're perfectly placed too, down low. As we see, as we pan over to the units themselves, they are indented at the bottom or have a cutaway that allows for the plug to go into the outlet. We're also going to connect the water line. This water line feeds downstairs. It's not connected to water yet, so we're not going to be able to test it. But we will connect it to the back of the freezer down here. We get our power cords, which have a zip tie on them. Plug one into each outlet. This is the water adapter that comes with the filter pack, with the accessory pack in the freezer. The water connection on the unit is a 3/4 inch diameter, but metric threaded, NPT threaded connector. You won't find a braided stainless steel hose at a hardware store that will fit onto this opening. So we suggest that you do use the included adapter, which adapts to a John Guest Quick Connect. You also get an elbow that allows you to place that in there. And then you can connect to your 1/4 inch polyethylene or even copper water line. Push it in nice and solid. And then we're going to screw it onto the water connection at the back. And it is a washer that is making the seal, so you don't have to crush it on there. You shouldn't use a tool or need to use a tool. In fact, it would be very difficult to get a tool on here. You just need to snug it on with your fingers so that is sealed. From when I did the initial leveling, I only lowered the outside rear rollers. So now we're ready to move the unit into the opening. So I'm going to lower all of the rollers, the rear rollers, just until they're in contact with the floor, so that everything is nicely supported and makes it easy to push the unit back. We're at the point now where we can push the two join units together into the opening. We've got the wheels in good contact with the floor. We've got the units plugged in. We've got the water line connected. I just wanted to point out that typically what I do is I will cover the edges of the opening that I'm installing into with some masking tape, just on the off chance to protect for any screws that might be sticking out that might catch the edge. These brackets are actually pretty nicely tapered, as you can see, so it will help guide the unit into the opening. But surprisingly, even though they are large, heavy appliances, they do roll quite nicely into the opening. You can't push the unit all the way in because the way that the panels mount on the front of the appliance, you have to set them on and then drop them down. If we were to push the unit all the way in and then try and put the panel on, we would get interference from this panel above. We're now going to prep the appliances for panel application. These are the brackets that actually get mounted on the panel. And the way they work is once they're mounted on the panel, we'll have, I believe, 8 on each panel. They will then hang on these, what I call shoulder bolts. In which case, once they're on there, we have the ability to adjust the panel left and right. We can adjust it up and down and still be engaged with this bolt. And ultimately, when we thread the bolt in, it will pull the panel in towards the door. We also have this set screw, which threads against the panel and puts pressure against it, working in conjunction with the shoulder bolt to effectively lock the panel into position. Preparation of the appliance, we'll be installing all of the set screws and shoulder bolts into their positions on the door. We have 8 positions on each appliance. The set screw has a hex hole going into the door. So we're going to thread that hex hole into the door in this position. And if it feels tight, don't worry about it because we'll be able to adjust it from the inside of the appliance door. The shoulder bolts go into the pocket. You just need 3 or 4 turns to engage it into the threads. In this case, we have some buildup of foam in there. You just use one of the set screws and your driver bit, and you can clean that out. And then you can install your shoulder bolt with a lot less effort. I'm going to start with the freezer panel, and the first step I'm going to do is mount the handle that the customer's chosen to put on here. Of course, you always have the option to order the factory handle kit that will mount on the overlay panel, but in this case we'll be using this custom handle. We're going to be centering it vertically on the panel. So the first step of that is to measure the length of the panel, and that's coming in at 1978 millimeters, and half of that will be 989 millimeters. Mark a light center line, 989. Measuring center to center, we see that the standoffs are 32 centimeters apart. So we'll want to be 16 centimeters off the center line for each hole that we're going to drill for the standoffs. We'll want to use a drill bit that's slightly larger than the actual bolt that will be passing through the panel into the handle. We're going to want to center the handle on the rail as well. And the rail is 2 1/4 inches. So we're going to mark it at 1 1/8. We'll do one more check. 828, 828. I prefer to use a hand driver to tighten the screws for the handles. You don't want to over tighten with a power driver and potentially crack the glaze or put too much of an indent. Now that I've mounted the handle, I want to orient myself for placing the brackets on the back. So I just mark, this is the handle side, this is the hinge side, it's a left hinge model, and this is going to be the top of the panel. Now I'm going to place all of the mounting brackets on the back of the panel. I'm going to reference the installation manual. The installation manual is universal for all of the various products. In this case, we're working on the 18-inch panel. We will use the 18-inch column of the table, which will tell us what the dimensions should be for the panel itself. And then marked on this diagram is the dimensions measured down from the top to place the brackets vertically on the panel. So the first step we're going to do is create a center line to split horizontally because the brackets are placed symmetrically versus the center line. And I'm also going to point out one of the challenges with this type of panel, which has a rail on it, a 2 1/4 inch rail, as you may recall. One of these holes is not going to line up or be over top of the rail, so we're going to have to use a shorter screw. So the screws that come with the kit are somewhere between 1/2 inch and 5/8 of an inch. That would be too long. When we place the inside screw, it would actually pierce through the front of the panel. We don't want that. So I'll be supplying my own shorter screw, which is about 3/8 of an inch, and will be confident that it's not going to pierce through the front of the panel. I'm going to mark the center line on the panel. The panel is 448 millimeters wide, so 224 is going to be the center. So make sure we're 224 from both sides. Looks good. We'll mark it at several locations. So when we're placing these brackets on the panel, placing them in this orientation, the measurement that's given to us in this table of 200 millimeters off the center line to the outside hole of the bracket. So measuring from the top of the panel, we'll be placing the brackets. The first one is at 112 millimeters. The next brackets are at 690.5. Next set is 1271.5. And the last set is at 1797. Each one of these crosshairs, I'll drill a pilot hole. Look okay. The last piece of hardware we have to mount on the panel is this vertical placement bracket. This will assist us in being able to adjust the height of the panel on the appliance. We'll use this bolt and washer. We'll pass through the top of the appliance door into the bracket. And as we thread it down, it will have the effect of drawing the panel up so that we can get them level with each other. After I placed all of the brackets, I came to the realization that we were using the manual that was intended for North American models. And of course, we had to make modifications to the appliance in order to fit it into the Euro spec opening. So these panels are of course also made to the Euro spec. So I've had to download the European manual on my laptop, and I'll have to replace these brackets in the correct location for the European spec. So we're going to go through that exercise again. I know from the previous panel that we did, the measurements for the handle we're going to install were 829. And we're going in 1 inch and 1/8. So just like we did on the other panel, we're going to do a center line so we can place our brackets symmetrically, measuring off that center line. The total width of the panel is 746, which means we will be 373. And we'll just mark that 373 all the way down in multiple locations. This time, this is our top. So I've taken the liberty of already hanging the first panel. It's not placed horizontally and it's not leveled or anything like that. And I'll show you or demonstrate how to put this panel on. Basically, what we're going to do is get this height adjustment bracket into the hole on the door, and then we want to engage each of the brackets we just installed on these shoulder bolts that are sticking out on the door. One of the challenges that we're facing with this panel, being an MDF panel, is it's actually got a bit of a curve to it. So it'll be a little bit challenging getting it on. It might take a couple of attempts, but that's one of the benefits of having these 8 fixing points, is that we'll be able to flatten and straighten this panel out once we get it on. So here the top isn't latched, the bottom is. So I'm going to keep my foot down at the bottom, pushing the panel in, and then we'll lift it up slightly until I feel it click on. And then we'll drop it back down again. So I've got the panels put onto the appliances. Of course, they're not fixed in position yet. Now it's going to take a bunch of adjusting as I move around. We have to raise the entire units up to fill this gap up here in the cabinets. We'll have to use our vertical adjustment bolts to bring the panels up as well slightly and get them level with each other. They're pretty good right now, but we'll have to get the bolts installed. In order to get the bolts installed, we'll have to make adjustments at all the fixing points to bring the panel in tighter to the appliance door. We want to get rid of this gap that we can see in here. We'll bring it in tight, just enough so that we can catch the top bracket with this bolt. So I'm going to move around the unit, doing leveling, moving the panels, moving the unit in until I get it looking the way we want it to. So you can see we've got 2 arrows up here. This is for the shoulder bolt. Turning this way is going to bring the panel in tighter. Turning this way moves the bolt out. Down here is for our set screw. Turning this way will move the set screw in against the panel and lock it in its depth. So right now we're going to bring the panels in so that I can get the bolt in up top into the bracket. As a gap. Now I've got the panels on. The panels aren't locked into position yet, but I want to get the entire unit up into a better vertical position and make sure that it's level left to right as well. So I'm going to use my 13mm 1/2 inch socket for the rear leveling legs and my 17mm wrench for the front leveling legs. What we've discovered, now that we've put the panels on the unit, I've done as much leveling as possible. I've raised the units up as much as possible. Even though the opening was made to the European spec of the appliances, the cabinet maker also added an additional inch to the height, as opposed to doing it to the spec. So I have not been able to raise it enough and then also be able to adjust the panels high enough in order to get a consistent gap at the top. So what I'm going to have to do is take the panels back off, and we're going to move the brackets down by 1/2 inch, which will effectively move the panels up by 1/2 inch, and hopefully we'll be able to make the necessary adjustments to do a clean install.